Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Good to see you another day. Sorry to bother you another day as well. My name is Tom Winter, as you know, spelled like the season, hailing from western Missoula County along the banks of the Clark Fork River. Today I bring you House Bill 770, the Marijuana Regulation Act. So we're likely to see a citizens' initiative on legalizing marijuana in 2020. Montanans need to know the facts before they make this decision. And as we are all here in a deliberative body, we have the ability, and I would argue the duty, to use the resources that we have to allow and accept and really help people make an informed decision. So with that in mind, I've worked hard over the last couple of months to build a legislative framework from which Montana can decide how we legalize recreational marijuana. So under this bill, the industry would be well regulated and built upon the successes and learning from the many, many failures of other states that have gone down this path, both in our region and around the country. So this bill was especially crafted to be good to small businesses. Montana is a leader in this country in small business ownership and entrepreneurship, and this industry should be no different. It will also make sure that we keep our kids safe from something that's already, I would argue, readily available to them and others in the black market. Instead, we should shift that money into a regulated market that is not available to minors. The revenue windfall from this bill, and there is a fiscal note coming, though there's only so much you can lean on Tom Livers until he stops talking to you, I have estimated to be $35 to $55 million. And of course, I am not a mathematician or a tax person, but I did do some good faith work on that went beyond just looking at a napkin. We will use that money to lessen your tax burden by paying for public schools. It will also multiply the meager amounts of money that we currently spend on addiction and mental health and work toward more law enforcement so that we can lessen the impact of this re-regulation and allowance of marijuana. I should note that I would hope that you would ask me where this money is going. I'm just not going to clutter this beginning opening with where the tax stuff goes. So the bill also has a criminal justice reform component, and I believe that really that's the biggest moral argument for this here. It's going to lessen the burden on our law enforcement community, and it's going to stop wasting resources on prosecuting and imprisoning minor drug users. We should not be making criminals out of those who use marijuana. It simply does not hurt other people. This is a personal decision that people make for themselves. I've also included language that prohibits the predatory marketing practices of the tobacco and alcohol industry. This was really important to me and something I work with the drafters on. Other states have seen, like I said, large corporations move into this new market. Also, this bill disallows candy-like edible products and the high-potency types of cannabis that can harm people's health. We've seen that in the news recently, and that's why I think this is an especially important thing to have here and air this out in this body. There have been situations in other states, I don't know if I'm allowed to name them, they are to our south, they are also mountainous, where they sell high-potency cannabis products that basically look like candy. And this bill was meant to avoid that specifically. I don't want to see that on that 2020 initiative. I don't want to see that in this bill, and that's a big concern for me. Perhaps most importantly, this bill has multiple layers of local control. We know Montanans like that. We know that's the right way to go. Counties and cities can decide whether or not to allow the sale of marijuana, as well as determine if they would like to have a local option sales tax on it. The voters will and should have the power to decide what works in their communities. They may use the money from the local option tax to pay for schools, infrastructure, property tax relief, whatever they decide is most needed. So I would argue the clock is running out on Montana and our state to implement its own version of legal recreational marijuana. Whether passage of an upcoming ballot initiative or the federal law changing, this is coming sooner or later, and whether we like it or not. The voters have spoken that prohibition has not worked. A Montana solution, made by Montanans, is, I would argue, the right road here. And with that, I hope we can have a good discussion here that will better inform our voters, as I've said, and help us understand what's coming down the road and see if we can get some legislation passed on this issue.
Are there proponents? We're going to limit this, so are there proponents?
Hello, my name is Sam Orr, and I come from Missoula, Montana. And I was a junior in high school when I watched the states like Washington, Colorado, and now Nevada, California, Alaska, Oregon, Vermont, and recently our nation's capital in D.C. legalized what we call marijuana. I'll be brief. Legalizing marijuana recognizes that making cannabis available to the public with the notion of careful regulation stops good, decent people from going to jail for possession. Legalization creates thousands of jobs for the economy and puts money back into the economy. As we have seen in the states that I listed, they use a lot of their revenue to help fund education, schools, and homelessness. Legalization would not only strengthen legalization would only strengthen Montana's economy. Please consider passing this bill. Thank you.
Next proponent.
Thank you. We're going to wrestle for the position here. For the record, my name is C.B. Pearson. I'm from Missoula, Montana, and I'm here on behalf of a number of providers, labs, and others who work in the marijuana industry. What I wanted to address is the fine work that Representative Winter did here. I was the chief strategist on Initiative 182, the medical marijuana initiative that passed by voters in 2014. I followed the issue quite well. And the representative has honored the medical marijuana provisions in the way in which he's approached this issue, that's important to me as both a patient at times. I'm glad to see that there's the proper interface of medical and adult use in this legislation. It was very well thought out. I know it's extensive, but this is a big area of the law. I hope you do give this a due pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Next proponent.
Good morning, Chairman. My name is Alex Gray. I'm with SD Consultants. And we are in strong support of the bill. Some of the main things that we really like about it is expungements of previous criminal convictions. We feel that this is just a plant. It doesn't harm anybody. There is no reason for there to ever be criminal convictions in the first place, and if this does pass, that would be an important part of it. We like that it keeps the medical marijuana program intact and even lowers the tax on it. It'd be nice if it lowered it to nothing because we don't think medicine should be taxed. And it's great that the burden of raising revenue for the state would fall on the recreational users. We like the fact that there's protections for people, for school enrollment, landlords. We think that the possession limits are reasonable. One of the only problems that we do have is it seems like it might not allow for the testing laboratories to have a courier license, and that would be a problem, but I'm sure that could be addressed. And then the one thing I really want to address is the potential for people driving under the influence. I have a feeling the Montana Highway Patrol is going to speak to you about that soon. And basically, I went on a road trip last year down the Pacific Coast Highway. Every single one of those states is a legal state. I didn't notice anybody driving worse than here. I certainly didn't feel that I was taking a bigger risk than I would be driving around Montana or any state where it's not legal. As has been previously said, people use this illicitly on the black market. So anybody who would drive under the influence in a legal sense is certainly already doing it now. In fact, there'd probably be more social pressure not to in a legalized and regulated state. So basically we feel that there's no real downsides. There's money to be made for the state. There's protections to be had to keep it out of the hands of children and to make sure that it's safely used and benefits everybody. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next proponent.
Good morning, members of the committee, chairman. My name is Angela Goodhope, and that's Goodhope. 10 years ago, I was a registered lobbyist on this issue, and this is just very exciting. We had a really vague decrim bill with Representative Wiseman, and of course, we were in front of the Judiciary Committee, and it stayed there, and now we're in front of the Tax Committee. I'm very excited. The bill is very comprehensive. It's very sensible. It's completely able to be implemented. He's obviously done his research. Let's see what else. Oh, my big point is the citizens of Montana are already using this. And they've been using it for decades. Some people you might have walked by used it this morning. They'll use it this evening. They'll use it tomorrow. Let's protect our people from being arrested. There's a lot of really far-reaching implications of a person who has a misdemeanor conviction, which I can speak to for myself. It's changed the trajectory of my life. Of course, this was in South Dakota in '99, so it's not Montana. Felonies are horrible. So why not do what's coming, it's already here, and implement something where the citizenry is protected from being arrested, losing their rights, and all kinds of things that happen from that. And on top of all of that, why not generate some revenue that we can use? It sounds like it's being divvied up to some wonderful resources and things that need it. So I would ask that the committee do pass this out, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next proponent. Are there any other proponents? Seeing none. Opponents.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is, for the record, Jim Sanderson, Sanderson, and I'm a lieutenant with the Montana Highway Patrol. We're definitely an opponent of this bill. I would submit that this bill is it's an experiment on a very, very grand scale with unknown consequences, and we don't have a way to measure the impact that it's going to have on our state. We do have other states in the region where it has had a negative impact. The first one that's, I think, on everybody's tip of their mind would be Colorado. So Colorado took a linear approach to marijuana, very similar to how we have already in Montana. And they've measured that impact. There's a study or a compilation of studies on the impact of marijuana that was put out by the Rocky Mountain HIDA called the Legalization of Marijuana in Colorado Impact, 2018. The Colorado Department of Public Health and Human Services also put out a impact on their part of their part. They put an expected impact and an impact that has already occurred since legalization. So just to go back in time a little bit, Colorado legalized marijuana, not commercial, in 2000 through 2008. They had between 1,000 and 4,800 medical marijuana card holders. Then in 2009, they commercialized the medical marijuana side of the house. As soon as they did that, the number of medical marijuana card holders immediately spiked to over 100,000 medical marijuana card holders in Colorado in 2012. In 2012, Colorado had a population of approximately 5.1 million people, to put that in perspective. In 2013, they recreationalized marijuana. So that's where we're at right now. Montana in 2019 is Colorado of 2013, where we're considering recreationalizing medical marijuana and decriminalizing marijuana. In 2014, they put their retail in place for the marijuana. So I'd like to talk about some statistics that occurred in Colorado since the time of actual legalization of marijuana. It's had some really, as I want to talk about traffic because I'm a trooper. That's the most important thing to me. It had negative ramifications, reference traffic safety in Colorado. Marijuana-related traffic deaths increased 151% after legalization. That's compared to the overall Colorado traffic deaths only increasing 35%. That's a stark statistic. Traffic deaths involving drivers who tested positive for marijuana more than doubled from 55 in 2013 to 138, latest statistic, 2017. The percentage of Colorado traffic deaths that were marijuana related increased from 6.17% in 2006. They had legal marijuana there, right? To 11.43% in 2013, the year that they made recreational marijuana legal in Colorado. And the latest statistic, 21.3% of Colorado traffic deaths related to marijuana, 2017, nearly a quarter of all traffic deaths. Colorado Department of Transportation survey found that 69% of self-admitted marijuana users admitted to driving after smoking. This is people willing to participate in a survey and willing to admit, yes, I use marijuana, then I drive. Since the legalization, there's been a significant increase in overall use in Colorado. It's more readily available. My concern is the children when you're making it more readily available. Surveys indicate that Colorado's past month admitted use of marijuana increased 45% when comparing the 3 years before legalization to the 3 years after legalization. Colorado's past use for ages 12 and older is ranked number 3 in the nation. It's 85% higher than the national average. When comparing the national average 3 years, or comparing the average in Colorado of 3 years before legalization, 2013 again, to 3 years after, college-age marijuana consumption increased 16% and was 60% higher than the national average. They're ranked number 7th in the nation. Now, Colorado has legalized marijuana only for people 21 and older. This bill wants to bring it all the way down to 18 years of age. So I think that you could use critical thinking skills and determine that the regulation isn't working if their college-age students are using it at that much more significantly higher rate. So the regulation isn't working and all of the college kids are smoking weed. Healthy Kids of Colorado survey of 2017, 21.3% of ninth graders and 47.9% of 12th graders, almost half of the 12th graders in the schools, reported, they admitted that they're using marijuana at least one or more time in their life. So this is kids admitting on a survey. Same study, or same survey, 2017, 11% of ninth graders and 25.7% of 12th graders admitted using marijuana one or more times in the last 30 days of the survey. And of those students that admitted using marijuana within the last month, 33% of ninth graders and 37.1% of 12th graders admitted dabbing. That's THC concentrate, BHO, honey oil, high-level THC drugs. So it has negative ramifications, in my opinion, to overall use in the state. Since the legalization, there's been negative health consequences in Colorado. The yearly rate of emergency department visits related to marijuana increased 52% in Colorado after legalization. And you think those numbers are low, but they're actually relatively high. 8,197 emergency room visits in 2011 versus 18,255 in 2014. The rate of marijuana-related hospitalizations, actually being hospitalized and they've identified marijuana as a contributing factor, rose 148% after legalization. They're comparing numbers of between 2012 to 2016. This is the statistic that sticks out to me the most. Marijuana only reported overexposures to the Rocky Mountain Poison and Drug Center increased threefold. That's from 2013. The date of, this is a compilation of statistics from 2013 through 2017 compared to 2008 to 2012. In 2007, 70 people actually called the Poison Center and said, I'm overdosing or I'm having significantly bad consequences of using marijuana. Of those 70 people, 16 were youth. In 2017, the most recent statistic we have, that increased to 223, 121 of those being under 18 years of age. So over half the people that they're calling the poison control number were under the age of 18. Suicide numbers when related to marijuana have gone up significantly since legalization. 10 to 19-year-olds who committed suicide in 2013 was 6 when marijuana was a contributing factor. 2017, it was 17. For all people 20 years of age and older, 2013, it was 99 where they could actually indicate that marijuana was in these people's system when they decided to pull the trigger or kill themselves. In 2017, that's 144. Contrary to some information that has been published, opioid and opiate deaths have increased in Colorado. There's many people cite that opiate and opioid-related deaths had decreased. According to the Colorado Department of Public Health, that is not true. They report that there's been a 33% increase since the legalization in 2013. And this is people actually dying of opioid abuse. There's claims that it actually decreases. That's not the case. Prescription deaths had decreased slightly between 2015 and 16, but increased to 357 of them in 2017. Heroin deaths increased 93% from 2013 to 2016, and then decreased by a small number, 7% in 2017. There's significant societal impacts post-legalization as well. A lot of people talk about the revenue that it's going to generate. In Colorado, the marijuana tax revenue represents approximately 0.9% of Colorado's fiscal year 2017 budget. Okay, this is according to the Colorado Governor's Office of State Planning and Budgeting. Property crime has increased. Violent crime has increased. Those are Colorado Bureau of Investigation numbers. Concentration of products of THC, the psychoactive chemical in the products, has consistently increased. Of the concentrate, the THC concentrate products that they test in their laboratories, and this is according to the Marijuana Policy Group in Colorado, 5% of the tests that were tested, 5% of the tests that were conducted in 2015 had concentrations of higher than 75% THC. In 2017, 24.7, nearly 1/4 of all of the THC concentrated they tested was higher than 75% THC. So in just brief summary, I think that we need to you guys need to keep into the back of your minds what's the consequence of a bill like this in Montana. Just comparing to what's occurred in Colorado, I think that we can expect more traffic deaths. Any avoidable death should be avoided. We should be able to expect, we should not expect a decrease in other drug usages. There's no empirical data to suggest that. We could possibly see increase in opioids such as they had in Colorado. I think we should expect increase in crime rates. We should expect more young users. And that's where I'm very concerned about. Marijuana use at a young age equates to lower overall IQ, apathy, loss of productivity, less prepared future workforce, possibly lower future tax base. I think you should expect to see more hospital visits, more strain on that system. I think you should expect to see more suicides. And I think that, yeah, you'll expect to see a small increase in revenue, but what are we going to offset? Is it going to be enough to offset all the negative impact? So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next opponent. I didn't get time with anybody today on that.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Kurt Sager, last name spelled S as in Sam, A-G-E-R. I'm a sergeant with the Montana Highway Patrol. My primary function with the Highway Patrol is impaired driving. I train law enforcement officers across the state in detection of impaired drivers, and I manage all of our impaired driving enforcement programs for the state. My specialty within that is drug impaired driving, and so that's what I'm primarily going to speak to you about. The mission of the Montana Highway Patrol is to safeguard the lives, property, and constitutional rights of those traveling the roadways of Montana. This bill is a big problem for that. I can't touch on all the issues with this bill. I don't have time for it. And you don't have the time for it. There are so many issues with this bill. It is unbelievable. I'm going to scratch the surface a little tiny bit on the problems that we're going to see with impaired driving in Montana. It's well documented across the country that the consumption of marijuana has drastic negative effects on traffic safety. There are numerous studies across the country and across the world that document this. Other states that have legalized recreational use of marijuana are right in the middle of this, and they're experiencing it, and they're reeling from the effects. The one that has been talked about is Colorado, and I'll reference some of that. In Montana, marijuana is involved in nearly 1/4 of all fatal crashes already. That's without full legalization of recreational use. If we use a conservative number of the increase that Colorado has experienced, Montana will see an additional 30 to 65 people killed on our roadways because of impaired drivers, those impaired by marijuana. You've heard talk about revenue generation, and the number was 45 to maybe 60 million, I heard. If you look at the cost analysis of what a fatal crash costs society, the round number that's used is $1.4 million in lost productivity, wages, contribution to society of a fatal crash. And that's not taken into the impact that families suffer when they lose a loved one due to an impaired driver. That number right there is going to cost us somewhere between $40 and $60 million a year. Taxes don't add up to that. Studies show an increased risk factor of 2.66 times among marijuana users when compared to non-marijuana users. We'll see an increase of all crashes, not just fatal crashes. In Montana, 48% of our cases, driving cases that were tested for drugs, came back with marijuana. Almost half. I want to touch on a couple things as to why marijuana is so dangerous for highway safety. We can tout the stats and show that there's plenty of that, but there's reasons why it's so unsafe. And I'll give you some examples that we've probably all experienced. One, when you're under the influence of marijuana, your pupils dilate. That may not seem like a big deal, but I can see a lot of people in here wearing contacts, and I'm sure some of those that aren't wearing contacts probably have glasses. So you've been to the eye doctor and probably had your eyes dilated. If you walk out, even on a non-sunny day, cloudy day, what do you see? Not much. You see a very blurred, painful environment that is not crisp and you can't process it well. That's what somebody that's high on marijuana sees during the day. How many people are kind of irritated by lights at night? Not necessarily irritated in a sense that it makes you angry, but lights coming at you at night are hard on your eyes. Well, marijuana use, when a pupil constricts due to a light like that, as the light is continually exposed to that, the pupil will continually dilate, going to a dilated state, which makes the eye more sensitive to light at night. So if you think you're blind with a normally functioning eyeball at night when a vehicle is coming at you, imagine if you're high on marijuana. Okay, two very well known facts. Another big dangerous aspect of it, people who are high on marijuana have an inability to judge time and distance. This causes lots of rear-end crashes. Several years ago, when we had a bill talking about per se limits for marijuana, right around that session there was a very well-known prosecutor in the state of Montana that was killed over by Warm Springs by a driver that was high on marijuana. Traveling down the road at over 100 miles an hour, rear-ended her, sent her into the median, killing her. That was marijuana. That is an inability to judge time and distance. And it goes into a couple other points that I'm going to bring up, such as relaxed inhibition. Drivers engage in riskier behavior. Many people actually believe that they drive better when they're high. They'll tell you that. There's lots of documentation out there. Oh yeah, I drive better when I'm high. Absolutely not true. The studies show otherwise. There's a lowered cognitive function when a person is high on marijuana. A driver's ability to process information accurately and react correctly to rapidly evolving situations is diminished. Johns Hopkins University did a study that found that regular users of marijuana operate at a suboptimal intellectual level all the time. You have to be able to process information to drive a vehicle safely. Motor skills are affected because the body is conflicted. They have an outside appearance that everything is calm, mellow, chill, but inside their body's racing. Marijuana stimulates the nervous system, which causes increased heart rate, increased blood pressure. Because of this conflict between the brain and what the body is doing, they have a slowed reaction time. They can't react to situations coming at them in a reasonable manner, which often leads to a crash. Driving is a divided attention psychophysical task. It's well documented that marijuana usage affects a person's ability to divide their attention amongst multiple tasks. If you think about it, how many things do you have to do when you're driving a vehicle? Lots, right? And then add into it all the things that we're doing that we're not supposed to be doing, like texting or talking on the phone or doing whatever else it is. Driving is the most complex divided attention task that we do on a day-to-day basis. We have to have all of our senses and all of our acuities to do that safely. Introducing impairment by any means is extremely detrimental to the safe operation of a motor vehicle. We've heard some information on high THC levels. This is becoming increasingly disturbing. Remember I stated that marijuana actually stimulates your body? What we're seeing in super high concentration THC cases is people acting and driving as though they are under the influence of a stimulant such as methamphetamine, because their body is going so fast due to the high level of THC concentration in the body. What's that equate to? High speed of driving. Disregard for traffic signals, disregard for the safety of others, and aggressive driving behavior. A lot like road rage. Unlike alcohol, you cannot use a non-impairing dose of marijuana. If you use it, you're high. You can have one beer, one glass of wine, one shot of whiskey, maybe even two depending on the person, and not be impaired by that. You cannot consume one hit off of a joint or a bong, one bite of an edible, one piece of THC and not become impaired. That's not possible. That's not how the drug works. The impairing effects of marijuana last for hours after the user feels that the effects have gone away. There are studies that show that the effects of marijuana last up to 24 hours after usage. A regular user is going to smoke on a daily basis, which in essence shows from the studies that they are impaired all the time and should not be driving a vehicle. There's a common misconception that driving while under the influence of marijuana is less dangerous than driving under the influence of alcohol. This isn't true. Not at all. And actually, based on the information that I've given you and the studies that are out there, and the common belief that many marijuana users hold that they actually drive better, marijuana use leads to a higher rate of occurrence of impaired driving by marijuana users than by alcohol users. Alcohol users know that they are impaired and they should not drive. They choose to do it, but they know they shouldn't. Marijuana users believe that they drive better when they're high. If we increase the number of marijuana users, we increase the number of impaired drivers. And if you pay attention to what's going on in Montana, our impaired driving situation is horrible. The last thing that we need is more impaired drivers on the highways of the state of Montana. One of the last things I want to bring up to you, page 1, lines 22 through 23 of the bill states, and we've already heard it, in the interest of allowing law enforcement officers to focus on violent and property crimes. And then it also has a statement in there about individual freedom. As I stated earlier, the bill is loaded with fallacies. But when it comes to safety of Montana's roadways, the two statements of allowing law enforcement officers to focus on violent and property crimes and allowing individual freedom, these two things couldn't be further from the truth. I think everybody would agree with me that homicide is a horrible, horrible crime. I don't know of anybody that would say homicide is not a horrible crime. When you take somebody's life on the roadway because you're under the influence of anything, that is a homicide. You are killing someone else. If we increase the number of people that are driving impaired on the roads in the state of Montana, we are going to increase homicide. That is violent crime. This does not reduce violent crime. This increases violent crime. And we know that statistically. Look at the states around us. Also, when it comes to freedoms, a person's freedoms stop where they infringe upon another person's freedom. Right? We know that. It's not somebody's freedom to cause a crash, injuring another person or killing another person, causing property damage to someone else. That's not an individual freedom. Okay? This bill's a nightmare to traffic safety. This is a nightmare to law enforcement. It's a nightmare to Montana citizens. Montana Highway Patrol urges that you do not pass. Thank you.
So we've used up most all of our time for opponents. So would you just state your name if you're opposed, please?
Brad Grimaud, Mr. Chair and Committee. It's Brad Grimaud, Montana Department of Justice, Narcotics Bureau Chief, and we oppose the bill. GREMAUX.
Dave Gulp, Montana Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, were opposed.
Other opponents? Informational witnesses? Questions from the committee? Representative Fuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Questions for the sponsor, please.
Mr. Chair, Representative Fuller.
Representative, according to Article 6, Clause 2 of the Constitution, the laws of the Constitution of the United States and laws of the United States are the supreme laws of the land, and all other laws must not conflict with those. And under the Controlled Substances Act of 21 U.S.C. subparagraph 811, marijuana is a Schedule I drug and still is. How do you reconcile that what you're asking the state of Montana to do is in complete violation of federal law? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Fuller, for your question. I wholeheartedly agree with you. And there is a legal note on this that says that to this effect. It also notes that medical marijuana is allowed within the confines of the state of Montana, was voted in twice by our citizenry, and we do allow it now. It is equally illegal to have it be medical as it is to be recreational. And I do agree with you.
Follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Representative Winter, then wouldn't your efforts be better suited to our congressional delegation and the efforts on U.S. Congress rather than on this body?
Mr. Chair, Representative Fuller, are you? I imagine you're suggesting that I lobby our congressional delegation to change federal law?
Mr. Chair, correct.
Chair Redfield, Representative Fuller, I am a representative state representing 10,000 people in the state of Montana. I lobby this body.
Representative Mahler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for the state trooper, the first one who spoke. I'm sorry I didn't write down your name.
Mr. Sanderson.
Mr. Sanderson.
Mr. Chair, Representative Marler.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Sanderson, you gave us a lot of data about traffic problems, and I want to say clearly that I don't think that anyone should be driving while they're under the influence of prescription medication, alcohol, cannabis, whatever. There seems to be some conflicting information about alcohol detected in the body versus THC detected in the body, they have different times that they are retained in the body, and the processing time is different for those. I am wondering if in the data that you gave us, which was a lot, sometimes you were talking about accidents that happened while the person was under the influence of cannabis versus when THC was detected in their body. Is that always tracked the same, or are they're not one and the same? Can you respond to that question?
Sure, they're not one and the same. And the studies that I have looked into, the data they attempted to sanitize and keep the data as empirical as possible. And so they used data that was available. And most of the data used that was available would not be case-dependent data, so it wouldn't be attached to a specific case. It would be blood results based off of fatal crashes that they analyzed at the lab, and that set of data.
Follow up, Mr. Chair. So I understand what you're saying. So in other words, if someone died, unfortunately, or even if they were arrested for some kind of under the influence, the data is not always compiled in such a way as to show if they're actively using or if they used a few weeks ago.
Not
right?
always.
Not
data
always.
that does
right.
suggest that.
Right. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And I have one more follow-up on something else. So the statement was made that people who drink alcohol know that they shouldn't be drinking and driving and using alcohol. Has that been true in your experience as a police officer? Because I have opinions on that.
I think that would be true in my opinion of me, but I couldn't relate that to
and
marijuana
me
consumption.
Too.
So, yeah.
I guess I'm just asking a rhetorical question that people aren't always self-aware, whatever substance they're using.
Sure. Maybe to answer that the best that I can, what Sergeant Sager was relating to was how the marijuana, that delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol affects the brain completely differently than the alcohol molecule. So you have a different perception of what's occurring The high's different, the drunk's different. It's completely different, but just as impairing, if not more.
Thank you.
Representative Dunwell.
Question for the sponsor, please.
Question for the sponsor.
Chair Redfield, Representative Dunwell.
Mr. Chair, Representative Winter, I think everyone here is concerned about protecting public safety.
As they should be.
That's not really debatable. I wonder if you can tell me, we heard a lot of data about in Colorado. So how does your bill compare with the law in Colorado? And if you go, if it's similar, how does it's similar? If it's different, how's it different?
Chair Redfield, Representative Dunwell, thank you for the question. It's interesting you asked that because this bill was really written in response to what occurred in Colorado. I think the entire country views Colorado as somewhat of a cautionary tale when it comes to regulating recreational marijuana, and that was where this bill comes from. And it comes in the sense that it comes from a response to the problems of what occurred in Colorado. Now, I deeply appreciate the work that the officers do and their statistics that they cited, and I cannot argue with them. But what happens in Colorado, specifically regarding high THC like concentrates, those are things that are specifically not allowed in this bill. And that would be unusual amongst states because the states that I looked at that have legalized recreational marijuana have allowed high potency, essentially high potency marijuana with a high potency of THC that are not in individual packets, essentially. Some of them come as tinctures, dabbing, which is something I've never understood, but I had to look it up and it is weird. Those are not allowed in this bill. And again, the intent of this bill is to learn from the problems of other states and let us and inform ourselves, our citizenry, hopefully pass this bill, but if not, get information out there so that we can affect the conversation we're going to have. And I think that the Highway Patrol has a lot to say here, and they're going to be the enforcers of a lot of these things occurring. So with the way Colorado has done it, this entire bill is an answer to Colorado's the problems that Colorado had and did. And you can go through, and that's especially with the edible products and the high-potency THC ones. I want to avoid that. That's especially regarding the use by children. We need to make sure that these things are regulated such as like the tobacco industry is, where we don't have brightly colored gummy bears being sold to adults, air quotes. That's not the right thing to do. And I think in Montana we know that, and I think that that's why this bill was created. I should note as well that there is the assumption, I guess, that I gave, and I couldn't find data regardless on it, but a large portion, and this is not a large portion of the proceeds and revenue generated by this bill, which the money's not meant to be a panacea, but the money that is generated does go toward enforcement, and also toward drug education and mental health education. And those are things that we're attempting to ameliorate by some of the things that might be caused by this bill. We want to make sure that it can fix some of the problems it causes. Because right now, if I look at the alcohol industry, I see something that's been, I guess I'm a user of alcohol, which I enjoy. But I would argue that also has perverse effects on our economy, on our citizenry, on the social fabric of our communities that we simply don't grapple with. And if this is going to become law, whether through initiative at some point, through federal changes, or through this bill, we need to make sure that we're bringing something where we've learned from other states, we've learned from the prohibition of the product, and we make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep our citizenry safe.
A quick follow-up, please. Yes, quick follow-up. Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Winter, you said at the beginning of your presentation that you're estimating this would generate between $35 and $55 million. Was that a year or for the biennium?
Year.
Thank you. Representative Kirk Carpenter. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a question for the sponsor, and I'm just wondering if you could speak more to this local option piece and how the structures you have in this bill would relate to local governments and what local governments could do.
Thank you, Representative Kirk Harker, Madam Vice Chair. So the revenue and the way it works, we have a 32% flat tax, structured like Washington's. Again, learning from the problem of Colorado, Washington put a flat tax on it at the end of sale so as to discourage the kind of forcing of large conglomerations so that we'd have large corporations that would be built around increasing the amount of the drug to be sold. The 5% local option tax, so counties or municipalities may opt in to selling marijuana within their boundaries. This is not forcing it on the entire state. I think the local option aspect is very important in that sense. The 5% was added in there because I want to ensure that we're looking at every way that if there are negative consequences to the selling of this drug within our state and within these jurisdictions, that local municipalities or counties can use the money to find a way to work around those or ameliorate those problems. And again, this is something we don't want to force on the entire state. And my concern is that if we see an initiative come up, or if we have other bills come up, or if we have a federal change in law, that we're not going to have the same local control. And I want to make sure that people who are living down the street from where this might be sold, people who want to buy it, or people who don't want to buy it, get to have a direct voice in whether or not that's the case in their neighborhoods.
Thank you. Representative Knudsen. I'm sorry. Quick follow-up. Just to clarify, the local control piece of this is literally whether municipalities will allow the selling of marijuana products in their like jurisdictions. That is the rest of the piece, the enforcement, et cetera, that's all spelled out in here, and that's a state level decision.
Representative Kirk Carpenter, Vice Chair Beard, I apologize for not answering directly. Yes, municipalities or counties may opt in, but the general laws regarding it are statewide.
Representative Knudsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question. I will just go ahead and direct it to you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Sanderson had a long list of statistics, and I'm wondering if we could get a copy of his testimony.
Could we get a copy of your testimony provided to the committee? I mean, you don't have to do it right now, but I mean, you could get a written copy of that.
Would you
go to the microphone and pull it to you so we can hear you?
Yes, sir. You could get a copy of my prepared notes for the testimony. I could also provide you with the sources that I've cited, which would be fourfold.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Representative Sheldon Galloway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I missed part of this, so if I'm asking a question that was answered, just wave me off here. For the sponsor.
Chair Redfield, Representative Sheldon Galloway.
Thank you, Chair Redfield and Representative Winters. I employ employees, and do I now have to add to my handbook that I can terminate somebody under the influence when I can't even know and prove that they're under the influence? Because I don't know how to do that. So would I have the right, I was hoping the Department of Labor would be here, would I be within without being sued for terminate somebody for this?
Chair Redfield, Representative Sheldon Galloway, I can only speak to this as someone who has employed people in a similar situation before. I mean, we as employers would be totally within our rights to terminate employment of someone who showed up drunk. And I would imagine we would be within our rights also to show up someone who is inebriated in this manner.
So the follow-up question?
Follow-up.
How do I prove that? I can smell somebody's breath, but how do I prove that? I am so naive to this side of the industry. I'm just seeing where I would set myself up. Is there going to be some government program that maybe gives me a workshop on what to look for and what to do? I just find myself in a bad position here right now.
Chair Redfield, Representative Sheldon Galloway, I certainly understand. When I was hiring employees in Missoula, we were within our industry, we were one of the groups one of the companies that drug tested. And we found that many people were screened out of our employment process that were otherwise qualified because the marijuana did show up in their system. And that system that we use now, where we use drug tests essentially, could be used for termination in that sense as well. You may choose to decide to do that. And inebriation under marijuana law would be within the statute. So there is a test, as the troopers were saying, about what detectable levels within your bloodstream, just as there is a breathalyzer for whether or not you have alcohol in your system. So if I may speak to whether or not you can smell it on someone's breath, I mean, my understanding is they could still sue you for wrongful termination if you misapprehended what that smell was and it was like heavily applied cologne that happened to smell like whiskey. Say say that I happen to cover myself in patchouli, would be the same thing. I would be able to say that this is wrongful termination. I'm not actually inebriated. There is no marijuana in my system. Please test me. So I think that we're okay where we are right there, but I don't want to mislead you. So.
Could I ask one question that's kind of completely different than that? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Winters. There's concern right now that the surrounding states around Colorado are suing the Attorney General in Colorado because people are legally buying drugs in Colorado and now selling them in Wyoming and those surrounding states. Would Montana be putting ourselves in that same legal scenario?
Chair Redfield, Representative Sheldon Galloway, I, as a non-attorney, cannot comment with any specificity on that.
How about we redirect to the Department of Justice?
Is the Department of Justice here?
Yep.
Hello. Yes, please. Department of Justice, thank you.
Mr. Chair, Committee, I don't know if this is a good thing, but I am not an attorney and couldn't answer that question either. However, I am aware that some states are suing other states that have legalized marijuana. Don't know the outcomes of those at this point. So,
Representative Smith.
Chairman, actually most of my questions have been answered. Great discussion, but I will go on record. I believe in states' rights.
Representative Cashmere. Are there other questions? I have one for Trooper Sager.
Mr. Chair.
Trooper Sager, I've got a good friend that drives truck, and he runs down that highway over on the coast, and those troopers, their favorite term for it is high five. But with that, in that same light, does he require a drug test? To have his license, you have to be drug tested.
Commercial motor vehicles, they are subject to drug testing, yes.
So are we in the trucking industry, are they having trouble finding help, or?
I can't speak to the trucking industry, sorry.
All right, and another question for you, is there a quick field test for the THC?
There is some testing for it. There's some oral fluid testing that is out there that detects past usage. The only test that detects current usage or the psychoactive ingredient in most of your cannabis products, that being tetrahydrocannabinol, is blood testing, which obviously is not a quick test that is done on the side of the road. There's no breath test for it. Urine testing is a fairly quick test, but that also just shows past usage. It doesn't show current usage. So the answer to that is yes and no. There is quick testing to detect marijuana usage. There's not quick testing to determine a level of psychoactive THC in one's body.
Okay, then I have one final question for the sponsor. Maybe this got covered when I wasn't in the room, but
Chair Redfield.
Representative, we don't allow 18-year-olds to smoke, but yet this bill allows them to do weed. So, there's inconsistency here, and sure. All these kids, and I was a school teacher, I understand what goes on. Doesn't mean it's right, and it doesn't mean it's legal.
That's true.
But we're trying to prevent addiction, we're trying to prevent smoking issues, on and on and on, but yet here you're going to say, yeah, we can do it. Explain that one to me.
Chair Redfield, thank you for the question, and I anticipated this question. And again, I'm not an attorney. Montana's Constitution, I would give it credit to giving 18-year-olds spelling out very specifically the things that are not allowed for adults. That includes the consumption of alcohol, and then I believe one other prohibition. Otherwise, all the rights of an adult are conferred upon an 18-year-old. So I want this to be discussed, and this was part of the reason I think this bill is important to bring. There is my assumption, again, that there will be a ballot initiative in 2020. We need this on the record, that we need to figure out a way to get a constitutional amendment language included, or constitutional change included in that initiative language, so that 21 is the age upon which people will be able to use this product. I could not agree with you more. And I wrote this so that you would ask this question, so that it would be out there, and so that we can have this discussion. Because I find it very important that 21 is the age, not 18.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Representative, you can close on your bill.
Thank you, Chair Redfield. Thank you, Chair Redfield, members of the committee. I do appreciate the discussion. Again, I hope I wasn't forcing anyone into a specific place by having this discussion. This bill is written in good faith, and I sincerely appreciate that people came in pro, but also in opposition, because I know that law enforcement is very important. I also know that they will deal with the ramifications of whatever occurs here. The statistics that were cited, I believe, were cited truthfully and very much so. But again, all of that is based on Colorado, and all of my bill is based on not doing what Colorado did wrong. So we're working within that framework. I really see, and again, I have worked with a lot of interested parties on this. This bill is 60 pages long, and the people that drafted it worked hard as well. So please don't consider this bill some sort of lark or one-off. This is going to be a discussion that from now on will be before this body many, many times. So if you keep getting reelected, you're going to keep seeing this. And I think the more that we have information out there and use the power of the tools within this building, be it the budget office, be it having troopers come and speak about the dangers of marijuana, be it people coming in pro about the fact that this prohibition, keeps them from doing something that they believe is within their right, this is a discussion we need to be having. Just like we're having the conversations every day in this room about the tax base, what constitutes a fair tax base, this is another thing that is on the topic of on many of our voters' minds. And so this is, again, one of those constituent things that brought up. I did not know I'd be talking about legalizing marijuana when I went door to door in western Missoula County. And yet it was the third thing I would hear after taxes and taxes, often. So that's just, it's on people's minds, and we represent these people. So we need to be having the same discussions that they're having in their living rooms. But we have teams of people who can come and speak on this issue. We have, again, the information in the governor's budget office about how this would affect our budget. I just want to add also that I have included amendments, which you'll see on there, which would bring this law into compliance with the Clean Indoor Air Act and remove a concept that snuck in there about marijuana couriers. And if I could use that as a little door to opening, which is the thing that I'm trying to do here, is make sure that we have a Montana solution to what appears to be a national problem. So the troopers spoke about high-potency THC products. Those are not allowed in this bill. They spoke about high-potency products that would effectively be marketed to children. Those are not allowed in this bill. There are couriers, which were apparently something that New Mexico was considering. I did not see in this legislation. I found it and was appalled. You should not be able to have it delivered to your house. That is not allowed in this bill. And the fact that those could be allowed as a matter of course is what concerns me as we move forward in this debate within in the society of Montana, and that's why this legislation is here. So I hope you'll give this a thorough consideration. And also, to Representative Fuller's point, due to the power of Wikipedia and my cell phone, I was actually able to find that on January 4th, 2018, this was a question you had about essentially states' rights and whether or not we were going against federal law. While Jeff Sessions rescinded 3 Obama-era memos that had adopted a policy of non-interference, on April 13th, U.S. Senator Cory Booker stated that that President Trump had reaffirmed his commitment to upholding the rights of states to regulate cannabis within their jurisdictions and assured states with legalized cannabis that rescission of the Cole memo would not subject them to federal prosecution. So we're in a legal gray area, and I fully acknowledge that, but so is medical marijuana. So I do appreciate your time. I appreciate the discussion, and I think our citizens appreciate this discussion as well.
This ends our hearing on House Bill 770. Folks, we're going to need to run down and do a quick caucus. We'll do it for 20 to 12. And with that, House taxes and recess.
Mr. Chair, the EA bills, all the ones we've heard today?
Yep.
Yeah.
Start executive action on House Bill 702. Is there discussion?